My name is Peter Young. I am your moderator for this session on Asian American career ceilings, findings, and solutions. And I'm very, very pleased to have some wonderful panelists here for this particular topic. So before we start our panel, I'm going to take just a minute or two and review what the Committee of 100 has been doing, because the Asian American career ceilings has been a major effort for us starting from about 3.5 years ago. And we have 34 different events featuring speakers, research, town halls, and so forth. So what I'd like to do is, just so that you know what the Committee 100 has been doing, just to show a couple slides about what we've done. So starting in February of 2020, when the Committee 100 decided this was a very serious issue, one that different organizations were trying to address, but no one was trying to sort of create an overall profile and try to integrate a lot of things in. So we started this program. Initially, we thought it would only be 1 or 2 webcasts and events. We've now completed 34 events in the last three years, in person and also webcasts. The interesting part is we've had 9,000 attendees and 11,000 viewings of the recordings. And those of you, if you wish, the recordings are available on the Committee of 100 website. I suspect that some of the 11,000 are just the panelists binge watching and watching themselves over and over again, just like Shogun or something like that, So we haven't been able to figure out how much of it is binge watching by the panelists, but if you subtract some of it, perhaps it's a smaller number. But we're going to continue to have about 6 to 8 programs a year. There's one very special one that's coming up that you're going to hear about, because we'll let you know, and that is we're going to have a summit in July where we're going to get together the heads of DEI groups and also of the nonprofits that are somehow related to the career ceilings issue, and get them together to really hear some opinions, but also to collaborate and try to create ideas together, new ideas of things that need to be done. We did this about 2 years ago. It was very successful. We came up with 25 ideas that we've been implementing, but we really feel that this is a way to get these organizations to collaborate, to find out what each is doing, but also create ideas that we can work on. So our view is that we're not competing with anyone. Our job is to help collaborate. The truth of the matter is Asian Americans are not known for collaboration, right? So we're trying to overcome the cultural tendency to want to sort of do your own thing. But we have published white papers with summaries of new ideas. The ideas have ranged from event calendars to directories and so forth. This is just a list of the events that we've had, and I won't go through it, but just by glancing through, it gives you an appreciation for the diversity of topics. Next one. But by glancing through, you just get an idea of the variety of things, and I'm happy to say that all 4 of the panelists here have been star panelists in these events, but different topics. So with that, what I'd like to do is, I'm not going to introduce all speakers, because I think on your app you can see all the all of the bios, but we have 4 very highly qualified people from different angles. Suzanne is doing different things in Jackson. You're doing it at MIT, and Amy is doing it in Gordon. But I think they'll bring a variety of perspectives to this issue. I want to start out and just have each one of you really comment on why this particular topic, the Asian careers, you relate to, and you personally, and in fact, all of you have had some involvement in helping to solve the problem. But I'm just going to ask each of you to take a minute and really talk about how you personally feel connected to the topic. Gordon, you want to start?
Oh, I wasn't prepared to talk personally, but I will. This is an issue that is very personal to me. I've been at Stanford for 30 years, and I recently stepped down as the Senior Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. It's a long title. I won't bore you with what I had to do. But I was the highest ranking Asian American ever in Stanford's administration. And this was now in the 21st century. Despite the fact that the undergraduate student body is something like 22 to 25% Asian American. Our faculty in the medical school and the engineering school is Asians are very, very well represented, not even just represented, overrepresented in those areas. And yet in leadership positions in the university, we have been invisible, not present. And I've groused about this, I made noise about this, I complained about this, I approached people about this for years. And when I first raised this, maybe 15 years ago, they said, we don't have a problem. And that was heard repeatedly, that Stanford didn't have a problem. We don't discriminate against Asians. I wasn't saying that Stanford deliberately, consciously discriminates against Asians, but there's a problem. And we can talk about what that problem is in a minute. But it is a personal issue. And finally, after making a lot of noise and try to assert myself and network with others, find mentors, I was appointed into this position, largely on the effort of a good friend of mine who was an African-American administrator. And he understood and helped mentor me and promoted me. So that's my response on a personal level.
Amy?
Thank you. Anne Lim O'Brien at Heidrick & Struggles. Well, Peter, you actually opened my eyes to this a couple of years ago when you invited me to talk about this. But at Heidrick & Struggles, we recruit at the top. And we also help develop leadership talent. So the topic is actually very close to my heart. We find representation, we can advocate, we can influence, we can raise awareness on the power of diversity on boards and on leadership teams. However, it's really abysmal to see that Asian Americans are not well represented. And under the underrepresented groups, they're even less represented. For Asian American women, especially when you think about it, women in general are more represented, but Asian American women are abysmal. It's about 2.5% representation in corporate boardrooms. So the subject is really dear to my heart from a professional point of view, but also personal point of view. When the hate crimes happened in 2020, I had this awful visceral reaction. I was talking to my husband about it, and then suddenly just the tears just started just flowing down, and I couldn't understand why I was feeling that way. But I realized
Was it you or your husband that was crying?
Me, and he was wondering why.
No, I just, as a moderator, I have to clarify these things, right?
It was me, and the reason why it's important to me is I realized at that point that I was just like most Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, good girl, worked hard, got to the top, but never really looked back or say, I can do something about this. Yeah. Never really found the time to give of myself and my time specifically for the cause. And those events actually helped me realize that I have something that I can perhaps give back. So that's my personal
You're
story.
fortunate because Heidrick & Struggles is one of the leading executive search, not only for senior positions, but board seats. So you're actually in a position to have an impact.
That's
whereas
right.
Not all of us are necessarily
That's right.
In that position.
Exactly.
Jackson?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackson Liu. I'm a professor and social scientist at MIT. It's great to see many familiar faces here. And why is this personally relevant to me? So, in fact, as many of you know, we all have stories and anecdotes and maybe some corporate surveys about the Asian career ceilings. But I think my team's among the first to systematically and scientifically study the Asian career ceiling. So this is basically what I've been doing for the past 7-8 years. And so this is my mission and passion.
Yeah, that's right. By the way, I'll tell you a short story, which is Jackson and Michael Morris, who's at Columbia, they did a lot of research together, and we had a webcast where they communicated the data and so forth that they had, and it was very interesting. That was a very wildly popular webcast, but their conclusion was, yes, Asian Americans don't do as well, but that South Asians, Indian Americans, do far better than East Asians, and also, do better than Caucasians, right?
Oh.
Anna?
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to be on this panel with friends and also to see so many of you in the audience. So I'm in this work because it's part of my lived experiences. So when I'm a senior partner at Deloitte, but I also am the co-founder and current president board chair of ASCEND, which is a Pan-Asian leadership organization that's been focused on how Asians can advance, and we're really the voice of Asians in the workplace. And when we started that organization, and we're about to enter our 20th year, so we've been at this for 20 years, it was really because some of us, and when I got promoted to equity partner at the firm in 2000, I was actually the first Chinese American woman to be promoted. And so when you think about that, the profession of consulting and accounting and technology had had decades of Asians and Chinese entering into the workforce. Why did it take until the year 2000 to promote a female that looked like me? So that was a pause for many of us. And I was actually looking at that through the lens of, well, maybe it's just my firm. And then we started looking at my clients. I started talking to my friends who were in similar situations, and we said, this is not a phenomenon unique to our profession, that when you look at Wall Street, when you look at any big corporations, there are a lot of people who entered those workforces decades ago who should have been in the C-suite already, but I wasn't seeing them in my clients' boardrooms. I still don't see very many of us in our clients' boardrooms. So really that led us on a journey to start ASCEND, where we do a holistic approach to looking at Asian leadership advancement, all the way from hundreds of programs we do every year that support anyone from starting their careers to then people that are in the corporate boardrooms. Anne's been with us on some of the work we're doing on the corporate board space. We are doing a joint project together called the Atlas, which is a big study of Asians in the workplace that will have an employer and employee component to it. So it really is a topic that we hope that for those of us that are parents, that a few decades from now, we won't be having the same conversation. But unfortunately, I think we will have a similar conversation because I don't think we can undo a series of systemic issues that we face in society and the workplace by one big swoop. So we're gonna have to work really hard at this work, and we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting from all of these different events and things that we have sponsored. The thing that I found really surprising was that it's probably a problem across a lot of different industries. I had this kind of gut feel, which turned out to be wrong, that surely in technology or medical, that the Asian Americans do well, and other ones, maybe broadcast, they don't do so well. But it's remarkable, whether it's academia or corporate or whatever, it's remarkable how widespread the problem is. So what I'd like to do is have each of you, because you're in different industries and different perspectives, today, how bad do you think the problem is, whether it's academia or in industry, and do you think there's been any progress, say, in the last 5-10 years? Gordon, you want to start?
Yeah, great question, Peter. Thank you. I'm actually going to start a little bit earlier about breaking through the bamboo ceiling in academia. The big breakthrough for many of us, we saw when Zhang Lin-Tian became the chancellor at UC Berkeley. That was a big event. The first time, high-profile university, and you had the leader who was a Chinese American, and he did a fabulous job, and I knew him, and I was so sad when he, too early, passed away. And since then, I think there have been improvements. We see more advancements. We do see Asian Americans in leadership positions in academia, deans, and prominent places in the East Coast School, the University of Michigan. So there are positive developments. At the same time, maybe it's my own personality. I'm a bit gloomy, actually, about prospects for the future. And in particular, the past several years. I think in some ways, it's turned opposite. And there's a gloom. There are problems out there, and these are things much beyond this room, much beyond as individuals. And I can connect this, and I don't want to make it too big, but I think it is relevant, is the China initiative. as universities were scared about the China, and they won't say it, but the FBI visited universities. They were looking at university scholars, Chinese particularly, ancestry, engineers, scientists, and universities, including Stanford, put us on notice that we were, the university was put on notice, and the university put us on notice. And they became sensitive to the presence of Chinese Americans. And I know scores of colleagues at Stanford who decided, okay, I've heard. And they back away. Instead of advocating for themselves, they became, in some sense, less assertive. And because they want to be less visible because of the bigger institutional environment. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and sadly, it's not just Chinese Americans. There's this tendency, a lot of groups and so forth, just to say, well, Asians are, Chinese, it doesn't matter, Japanese, and like a lot of the hate things, they're not just, the victims are not just Chinese American, they're Japanese, Korean, and so forth, so it's a problem. Amy?
And
And
Oh, Ann, I'm sorry. Sorry, Ann.
that's
Ann.
all right.
You're going to have to
I've been
change
called
your
worse,
name if you're gonna
Peter.
be friendly
Really, I've
to
been
the
called
moderator.
worse.
Yeah, Ann, sorry.
I think something that Gordon just shared sparked my remembrance that the whole tension with China does have an effect in the business world, and it's not as much in careers, but you asked how the state of it is. What we've seen is we do a lot of background checks on candidates at the highest levels. But what we've heard back from some of our clients is that they have a hard time when they're trying to staff a role that is China related, because there's so much investigation, criminal check background, and there's no information available at the China level, but so it does have an imposition on how American businesses can do business in China. Now, that's aside from the question you have on what is the state here. So that is just a very interesting thing to learn from you, Gordon. In terms of how interesting and how bad it is, our clients and also within Heidrick & Struggles, the whole formation of ERGs. Now, that's not a new thing. ERGs have always been there, but the rise in Asian American ERGs, because I think trying to find a way to have a voice in their own organization has become a phenomenon within the companies. However, as one of my good friends, I think Kelly, you're in the audience, she said to me, it's not just about having ERGs so that you can have a social potluck evening dinner or evening markets. It's more about how do we get the participants in the Asian American space to be involved in critical business issues, strategy, innovation, recruiting, things that are in the heart of the business so that the voice is there. I also think that there is an opportunity, and this hasn't happened yet. There's an opportunity for all the ERGs of the D&I groups to come together within each company, and that has not really happened. It happens to be in silos.
Siloed, yeah, right.
Which is unfortunate. That's how unfortunate the situation is right now, but we can perhaps find solutions for it.
Yeah, and that's part of what, when I started, I said we need to find ways to work more together, So, Jackson?
Yes, so as a social scientist, all I have is data, right? So what I can tell you is based on data of 11 years, unfortunately, things are not improving. So I'm going to share 4 pieces of information. And just to make it more interactive, right, the first piece of information. So I'm at a business school. I'm a professor at a business school at MIT Sloan School of Management. Consider the top 100 business school deans. So we have 100 business school deans. Right, just to make it more interactive, how many Asian deans do we think there are? You can shout out some numbers. So someone said 5?
3.
0, 1, 0.
Okay, so we have different guesses. So altogether, out of the 100 Asian business school deans, we have 19. So 19 out of 100 doesn't actually sound small, right? But as Peter alluded to earlier, a key contribution of our research stream on the bamboo ceiling or Asian career ceiling is to distinguish between different types of Asians. So it turns out that among the 19 Asian deans, there's only one East Asian dean, which means that the remaining 18 Asian deans are all South Asians, right? So including the current deans of Harvard Business School, Cornell, NYU, Maryland, Chicago, right? So these leading business schools. So that's the first piece. And because we have archival data for 11 years, I can tell you that has not improved over time. And relatedly, we can think about the sort of the so-called real world, right? The business world. I want to think about we're all, Asian here. So think about how many prominent East Asian CEOs you can think of. I'll give you a moment, right? So maybe you can think of a handful, right? So 2 points. One is there are very few to start with. That's number one. And second, the very few East Asian CEOs you can think of are mostly entrepreneurs, meaning they start their organization, they're the founders, then of course they're the CEO, right? In fact, in conversations, if you read the interviews, you will see that some of the East Asian CEOs, the reason why they became founders is because they experienced this Asian career ceiling in their previous organizations. So almost entrepreneurship is a form of escape from the career ceiling. By contrast, if you think about, actually there are many prominent South Asian CEOs, the current CEOs of Google, Microsoft, IBM, the previous CEO of Twitter, Starbucks, FedEx, Citigroup, Pepsi, and so on, right? And similarly, we see this not only in these S&P 500 organizations, we see this also in consulting. So we have really interesting data from one of the big three consulting firms. I'm not going to say which one, right? So we know the number of, and we know, details of these partners in the US offices. So it turns out that among all the partners in US offices, only 4% are East Asians, whereas actually as many as 24% are South Asians, even though far more East Asian MBA students go into consulting, right? And if you think about the general population, East Asian general population is about 1.5 times larger than the South Asian population. And we see this not only at the sort of occupational industry level, even in, for example, university context, right? At business school, we have a lot of data on the MBA students or master finance students. We can see that among all ethnic groups, East Asians are consistently proportionally underrepresented, whereas actually South Asians often the best represented in terms of proportion.
By the way, I'll encourage you to watch the recording where they show the data. They go really through all the reasons why.
I don't know how you follow Jackson with all that data.
Very carefully. By the way, Jackson, I came across, my wife is a professor at Columbia, as you know, and was a dean. And I found a T-shirt for her because the academics have a certain, and this would be good for you, Gordon. There was a T-shirt that said, data rocks, all other things are just an opinion. Go ahead.
I agree with that.
Building on what my esteemed panelists have said, there's a lot of, I would say, misnomers out there about the Asian experience in the corporate workplace. Whether it is when we look at our results in an aggregate, that leads to a certain conclusion about Asian success. But even disaggregated, even when you get down to a granular level, I'm going to share an example. So Ascend just released, in addition to building community and doing leadership development and our community work, we actually do a lot of research and studies. So one of the annual studies we do is looking at corporate board representation. So we've been studying Asians on corporate boards in the Fortune 1000 for quite a few years. We did the first study and we've continued that. So the numbers would say we're actually doing better. So there's actually more Asian representation on the Fortune 1000 boards. We're at 6.4%, which was an improvement. We were at 4.6 about 4 or 5 years ago when we started this work. So on the surface, when we go and present those numbers, the first reaction is 6.4%, that is great. You're at parity with the population because Blacks, Hispanics, women are not at parity yet. So we don't have to worry about the Asians. So that's usually where the data actually is harmful without the context. And I think that's very important for this room to really understand that. So when you hear that number and people say, oh, Asians are doing fine enough, You have to peel the onion to some of the stats that this group knows, right? So then you have to follow up with the argument. Did you know actually 60% of us graduate from college? Well, what is the profile of someone that goes on the boardroom? They typically have a college degree, if not an undergraduate, even more than that. Did you know in some of these companies that maybe have 6.4%, 40% of their workforce is Asian? And I'm talking about even in aggregate, forget about disaggregating. So that is one of the really important conversations. One of the conversations we've been driving is, what does good look like? We have to change that conversations in companies. Most companies and society looks at things like representation and good relative to a general population number. That argument works completely against what we would say is good for Asians.
Yeah.
But that is a very difficult argument. Every day I'm in a conversation on data, on what is the gap we need to close, and every day I come up with this: Asians at about 7%, you're more than well represented. In fact, you might be overrepresented, but that's actually not true when you look at the jobs, when you look at the positions, when you look at the qualifications necessarily for those roles, and when you also look at then the workforce pool that's pulling in there. What all this is saying is our seepage is quite high, right? So many are either stalling, which we know that's a fact from our data and our research, or they are leaving I'll call the big companies and the corporate workforces to go start their own company. There was an example in the other room about Morris Chang and TSMC, because he didn't get promoted at Intel. In fact, I think you said that, Peter, right?
No, I mean,
and then
Morris
he went
Chang,
back to Taiwan.
You're right, was a classic case of a career ceiling, right?
Right, career
Much to the
So-
loss of Intel and the United States.
So those are some dynamics. But the other dynamic, which Ann and I have talked a lot about, is that people don't perceive, we have an issue as it relates to advancement. And we can dissect why that is a convenient narrative in America, that Asians don't have that's a conversation. But as a result of that, when Ann does board searches, when I get inquiries from clients about who they want on a board, they don't, top of mind, say we need an Asian. Even though, again, our recent board study for Ascend said over 50% of the Fortune 1000 don't have a single Asian on their board. So pause on that. Think about what we just said about our contribution. Think about Asia as a marketplace. Think about Asians as US consumers, that over half of the Fortune 1000 doesn't even have in that boardroom of about 10 to 12 people a single Asian voice being able to ask the questions of what's going on with your workforce. Why is there no one of Asian descent as part of your succession processes? What are you doing specifically to target the Asian market? How are you recruiting? Where are you investing in the community? So that in itself, again, is indicative of the gaps we have to close.
Yeah, and actually, to link a little bit, the debate that we had at the beginning, right, where we were talking about DEI and so forth. I was a moderator, so I wasn't allowed to express my opinion. All I was allowed to say is, you have 10 seconds left. Right? But, I want to share with you a perspective, maybe a little different, which is, we may want to think about this issue differently. Rather than thinking about percentage population and so forth, we should think in terms of a level playing field and hiring the best people, because that's defendable, right? If you're the CEO of a company, you could say, it's easy to defend, I'm going to get the best people in each job, right? And I'm not necessarily going to favor someone, whatever. Now, it doesn't solve the problem that maybe certain ethnic groups in the early stage of education are disadvantaged or so forth, and so they don't really get an opportunity. But it does address the problem in a fair way, and doesn't put companies on the defensive, right? Because it's hard to tell the CEO, well, you're wrong that you want to hire the best person for each job, right? It's much harder to attack someone for that, right? Whereas you say, well, I want to get more Asians or whatever,
But
and then
Peter,
it's easier.
I think companies, and this is the debate that I talk to companies about most days, they all, in their processes, hired the best. Anyone that started their career, if you have children on college campuses, you know how competitive it is. They have all hired the best. That's not the issue. The issue is, what did they do with the best to help them continue to thrive and move through their systems and get
I'm
opportunities?
not sure you're right about hiring the best out of college and so forth.
Okay.
But I think it's I do agree that the career ceiling thing is less of a problem at the entry level. I agree with that. But I do not agree that they don't discriminate when they hire entry-level people. I do believe, however, that the farther up in the ranks, the bigger the problem. The bigger the problem. Right?
I want to challenge.
Please,
Go ahead.
you go first.
Everyone's challenging Peter now. This is a debate.
Argument. That's good. All right.
So I want to challenge this. You know, you say certainly people want the best applicants, you want the best people in positions, whether college or. It begs the question: how do you define who is the best?
Yeah, that's correct.
And because that raises the issue of perception, bias, institutionals, whatever. And I think it is, if you will, too easy a way out to say, of course we want to hire the best people. You want for a company, that's what it's all about. And for a university, you want the best. But how do you determine who is the best? Is it GPA? Is it SAT scores? Is it overcoming adversity in different ways? Is it leadership expressed as an entrepreneur, as a community leader, as an activist? What is the best?
But you know, I'd rather be make the argument at that level than at this level. You know, when you have discrimination based on race and so forth, that's a different level. So both are a problem, right? But I'd rather have the argument about how do you figure out what's the best than to have people discriminate based on race, right?
But Peter,
or gender, right? Go ahead.
It's a supply chain.
Yeah.
When you think about, there was always this question of whether you have enough directors qualified to have that role. And on the candidate side, it's we don't get to hear about the opportunities. We don't get the call. We don't see it. So there's going to be that constant supply or demand issue around that. I also think it begs the question when you say, let's look at it a different way. I think what do I know? I've been in this country for only 35, 40, almost 36 years. I've seen the difference, though, in terms of how diversity is viewed by corporations, but also the self-selecting of going up the ladder for some reason that I'm sure Jackson or Gordon can help me, and Anna, you've got a lot of access to data too. There is definitely a ceiling or a block, whether it's self-imposed or whether it's imposed by the organization.
Yeah.
So I think we would be smart to examine ourselves as much as the companies that we're with and how progressive it is and what can we do about that.
Yeah.
However, we've got to own it. I think we've got to own our own personal brand. We have got to own how we show up as a leader. We've got to be intentional. And this is, I mean, you could say the same thing of any cohort, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to be careful there. But given that as Asian Americans, we're a little bit more modest, a little bit more humble. We are so known for our contributions at the grinding, day to day. We don't lift our head up enough to say, wait a minute, where are my mentors? Where are my sponsors? Where are my opportunities? How will I be perceived if I was pushy? I mean, I just have had a client who came from a major.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
From a major, I'll have to say McKinsey, into a corporate, I'll say a COO role in a company. And she was running and gunning for more and more and more responsibility. She's really good. And she was a client, because she just was told she was not going to make it to the top. And she's like, I'm going to go somewhere else for it. But that's the point. When you can, you still will have a block.
Yeah. You know, in fact, I think you make a really good point because, and we've had a number of, it's easy just to blame someone else for everything, right? It's somebody else's fault. And the reality is, your point about how some of them are our own problem, that we create our own problem, is absolutely true. And for example, we had a webcast where we just had parents talk about how they raise a kid. And it was very clear that by different ethnic groups, there was a lot of self-imposed problem. Just study hard, which of course is not the formula for corporate success. Jackson, you know, you talked about, we had one on, you know, why are Asian Americans paid less, right? And you know, you pointed out part of it is don't ask for more money, right? Which is, you can't blame the person who won't give you the raise if you don't ask for a raise, right? So there are many examples. I encourage everyone here to not only think about the systemic and corporate practices that inhibit, but also say, are there things that we're doing ourselves or not doing, right?
Yep.
That are inhibiting ourselves? Because you got to fix both, right?
Absolutely.
Any other comments on this issue?
Yeah, I think building on Ann's point, we should give ourselves also some grace. I think as a community, we beat ourselves too much. We walk around as if we failed because we didn't, even this conversation sometimes when we talk about glass ceiling, there's this fine line around that, right? If many people in this room may come from very modest means, maybe immigrants, so whatever you've achieved at a certain point in your career is way exceeding whatever your family structure others have. Absolutely. And that actually is one of the things I see of, it's not that those individuals that choose to settle in the middle or upper middle weren't ambitious, weren't X. They've made a choice about the risk of speaking out, disrupting to then what they've achieved. Right? And if you think about family and the importance of family and providing financial security for your family, the risk of losing a job, switching a job, having no income for a while, probably it's big for everyone, but in our community it comes with so much other stuff, right? Based on whatever is, again, your family structure, right? If you're first generation in a corporate environment, big corporate environment, you're working at a prestigious company, you're making a fair amount of money, you have that nice big suburban house, it's a different risk consideration for that person when they need to do certain things, whether ask for the raise, you know, go switch companies, than it is for someone else that came from a different background, right? In our community, because most of us in the workforce are immigrants, you're gonna make different risk choices in some of those considerations. So, and I always say that because then I coach the people who manage people like that, I want them to dive deeply so they can motivate the person and liberate them to make some of those choices and give them the confidence, right? And make it feel less risky for them as an individual to make those asks.
Absolutely. And I do think that's, Peter, we've talked about this for a bit on the last time we talked about it. I think that it underscores the role modeling. And I'm not necessarily just referring to corporate mentorships and sponsorships. I'm talking about, in general, the role modeling of, yes, I can, or I believe I can get there. There are enough Chinese American, Asian Americans in corporations that can pave the way, but what are we doing about having them voice over their stories? And I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in media, mainstream media and entertainment to showcase, not show off, but showcase the strength that comes from an Asian American cultural set. You know, whether it's Michelle Yeoh's Everything Everywhere, or whether it's a dark comedy like Ali Wong's, you know, in Beef. I don't mean to make light of it, but it made me think about how the African Americans, when they got the general population awareness, it was through a lot of their cultural activities, you know, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's in the music, whether in the corporations they have the executive leadership committees formation of those groups, and hats off to you and Ascend and Pinnacle. Those are the role modeling that I'm talking about, because you really cannot be what you cannot see. I believe in that, which is why I cried when I did. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't do my part. There is, every one of us who has got some level of accomplishment already here can be that role model for the level that wants to come up.
One of the things, and Anne, I don't know if you observed this, many of us in the room work with many other senior Asian executives. And one of the things I debate with them on is there enough a degree of public sponsorship and advocacy for other Asians? It's not studied, so I don't have the data to support my hunch and my observations but the answer is no.
No, in fact,
And
all you have to do is compare with other ethnic groups
Correct.
who are doing better, whether it's the Jewish American community, the African American.
But I'm
And
talking
you don't
about
even have to do a whole lot of data analysis to see that they're doing a lot more in terms of getting together, and making an impact and getting people into, to
Right.
offices and run for offices. So
But you can
they
see
do a much
exactly.
better job.
You see that in the politics side,
Absolutely.
but and the same dynamics happen in corporate. And I think some of the speakers have talked about it, right? If you are the only Asian C-suite, you're kind of very alone in that work. So it's not till you get a few more, and Asians seem to have more of a fear of people questioning our loyalty, right? I work with many women executives of other color. The women are not actually, or maybe we all have a little bit of that, but people are less concerned that someone's going to question, did I promote a female just because she's female?
Yeah.
But I will tell you, a lot of Asian executives are very concerned that if they go and publicly advocate, sponsor for another Asian, for Asians in these roles, someone would question whether they actually are doing it through a lens of bias. And that is something we need to work out, right? Both in terms of getting more people so you don't feel so alone, but also being confident that someone won't, just because I have Asian staff, it doesn't mean my Asian staff is not good, right? It doesn't mean that just because I choose to advocate and support another Asian for a promotion, it doesn't mean I'm just being racist and discriminatory against others. And that's hard, right? Because we're dealing with these numbers, right? People thinking that there's enough and all these other dynamics. So I say that because I think each of us in this room, if we have their own biases against our own people, we need to tap into that and make sure we are not actually inadvertently doing the reverse of what actually people even expect us to do.
We're going to have one last question because I've been asked to make up time for the people who were the previous panels that were late in the interest of lunch, by the way, which I think is a very good, worthy cause. Now, I am going to correct one thing that you said, because when I mentioned
My
Jewish...
moderators never correct me. They just let it go, Peter.
No.
I'm just teasing him. He
I
owns the mic. He clearly can do whatever he wants.
Because you reacted to my saying about Jewish and you said it's political. But if you look, for example, at the business, because the Jewish Americans have done a fantastic job
Correct.
Yes.
of succeeding.
Yes.
It's
Absolutely.
not just political.
No, I'm not,
So
but I'm
just
saying it's a good
reacting to your
example.
saying it's just
Agree.
political. I wasn't actually making the political point, but, the
I
Jewish
agree.
American community has done a fantastic job of helping each other succeed in business. We all know that.
Yes.
In my profession, investment banking, they have a very powerful, and it's not because they're not discriminated, it's that they've gotten together and tried to help each other, right? So the last question is this, and that is, what is it, and I'm going to ask each person to comment in your area, what are we not doing today that we should be doing that would help this issue? Start out with Gordon.
Well, one thing we are doing is that we're meeting and talking like this. I think the more discussion and more sharing is fundamental, and that we have to work as a collective, as has been said. The other point is, I think we have to take individual responsibility to be assertive, as we use that word a lot, to ask, to find out what's going on. And I will just give you an anecdote. I'm a historian. When I hear the word data, I think, well, okay, numbers. Historians like what we call the telling anecdote, the telling story, the story that really captures a qualitative situation, as opposed to just the numbers. So here's the anecdote. I spoke to a social science colleague of mine, a senior professor at Stanford, who works a lot with data. And she told me, this was in passing of some other discussion, she went to a conference, invited to a conference, and they said, how much do you want to honorarium? And she thought, oh, and she's third generation Chinese American, very articulate, and would be right on board with everything we said. She was saying, maybe I'll ask for 5,000 honorarium. That's a lot for academics, maybe for you guys in business it's not very much, but for us, that's a pretty good honorarium. And she said, well, maybe I won't be so aggressive. I'll ask for 3,000. So she gets 3,000. She happened to talk to a colleague who was junior to her, to go into the same conference, it's all the same, to talk on the same type of responsibilities. And he said, Bud, or whatever his name was, by the way, what did you get for the conference? He said, well, I asked for 10,000, and I got 10,000. He's a tall white male. So it works different. I mean, so this is a telling anecdote because she, sort of constrained herself. She could have asked for 10,000, but she didn't even ask for 5, she asked for 3. And then the institution didn't think about equity. And in fact, she should have gotten more because she was senior and so forth. So it is a complicated, multifaceted issue.
Yeah? You're something that we should be doing that we're not doing.
I think it's agency and ownership for it, personally and at the workplace. And by that I mean we should celebrate and be proud of ourselves and our own accomplishments, and therefore encouraging others to do the same. At the end of the day, though, I think that while we are all striving, and maybe we're not defining the problem the way it could be redefined, if I were to say I own my problem, I own the issue, I have to get my own, I've got to go do these things, personal growth, sponsorship, all the right things. At the same time, what are we doing the right things about and for? I think we need to define what we want as an outcome, Peter. In other words, this is going to be controversial. In my mind, one of the things we've said is being an Asian American, you get biased against. Okay. But that's because someone has this picture of what an Asian American is. If we were to claim that and say, I'm just like you, yeah, I am tone, color, skin, appearance, language, culture, Asian American. However, underneath all that, I'm like you. I have the same aspirations, I have the same ambition, I can think as smartly as you can. I mean, just owning it and really intentionally and authentically being yourself so that you can connect with the next person, white, whatever color, as a person and shine as an Asian American. That, I think, Peter, is an encouragement I would give to the room and to anyone who is thinking about diversity as an issue or as a stumbling block.
Jackson?
Yeah, thank you. Very insightful comments. First, I want to just corroborate what Gordon said. So in fact, we conducted a 19-year archival data set, and we published
There. We got 2 data guys.
No,
Yeah.
That's why you separated us.
Yeah, so I
Gordon
just
said
want
he's
to
not.
say, Gordon was absolutely right. So we actually see that very clearly demonstrated in our 19-year archival data of MBA students, and we see that among all ethnic groups, East Asians are the least likely to negotiate the post-MBA salary, where South Asians are actually the most likely, right? So again, when you combine the 2 groups, we see that Asians on average do quite well. So definitely agree with you. So in response to Peter's important question, I will share, I guess, 3 things. First, the first important step is to raise awareness, right? And raising awareness comes with all kinds of different forms. But one thing is to do so with data, because oftentimes when we just share anecdotes, it's a bit random. They say, well, is that really representative? How generalizable is it, right? So,
And by the way, if you cite data, make sure in the footnotes you cite his study. Right? You say, you can say, I
Just
want to
cite the
raise,
appropriate
by the
one.
way, here's the data from Jackson Liu's study, right?
So basically, I think the first thing is to raise awareness, right? Because as many people have alluded to, in the US, Asians were known as the model minority, right? We do have the highest educational attainment, highest median income, highest, lowest unemployment rate, lowest crime rate, and so on, right? And I think that's why, in general, we're considered Asians, not Besians, right? But I think it's important to think about the perception and to what extent is that true, right? And as I've discussed, when we separate, let's say, East Asians and South Asians, oftentimes we see striking difference. But when you see data, because anyone can Google who is the dean of Harvard Business School, who is the dean of Chicago, and so on, right? So when you show them such striking statistics, I think we have more buy-in. So that's the first point. The second point, and related to many of the points discussed already, I think as a researcher, as a social scientist, in every single research publications, I always emphasize the onus of breaking the Asian career ceiling should not fall on East Asians themselves, right? But rather, I think it's a 2-part responsibility. At the same time, to Peter's point, I'm also not naive to think it's only an organization's problem, right? I think we can do things as individuals and organizations. As individuals, when we think about, well, what can we do to overcome, to shatter these Asian career ceilings? We have to go to the bottom to understand, well, what are the explanations, what are the mechanisms for why the patterns I described exist? So over the past 7-8 years, we've systematically examined 9 different potential mechanisms. Is it leadership motivation? Is it the language, English fluency? Is it the communication style? Is it the social network ethnic homophily? Is it animus-based prejudice? Is it creativity stereotypes? And so on and so forth, right? If you're interested, I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation.
We're really running into lunch now.
Okay.
So summarize your third point, and then we get our last comment, right?
Great. So
Yeah.
Third point, as I alluded already, I think there are many things organizations need to do, right? So for example, understanding that, let's say, while research suggests that more assertive individuals are more likely to emerge as leaders in organizations, more assertive individuals are not necessarily the best, the most effective leader, right? So theoretically distinguishing between leadership effectiveness versus leadership emergence, and understanding what organizations can do. Maybe there are many East Asian values such as collectivism, group orientation, and so on, that are actually extremely beneficial for organizations. So to conclude, both sides have to work together.
Good. And last, and Anna's going to get the last word.
Yeah.
How do we get from 6% to 30%, right?
That's not going to be how.
Write this down.
So the key takeaways, one is each of you in this room can be an educator and drive that change. So get to know the data, but when you see someone that's making a decision, not with a full set of facts, and you're in that moment with that person, you need to call them on it and say, hey, you don't have the full answer. And if each of us does that, we would drive more change. Don't let it go. Don't wait, because then they believe that is the source of truth. So you are actually a source of truth on that. Second, again, back to the data and bugs in the room, just as a planting of the seed, because this comes up when we talk about gender, race actually in our Ascend work has shown race is a bigger factor in terms of creating the gap, more so than gender, which may be contrary to what we perceive in terms of barriers for Asian success. And the third part is, this is a long game. This is a very long game for us to get to what great looks like in terms of parity and change. So don't give up. This is a marathon that we are all on. We are all trying to make these sprints, but this is a marathon. And if you don't keep up your energy and belief that we own and have a right to have a seat or many seats at that table, we will not change this conversation, and we'll still be having this conversation with incremental moves in the numbers 50 years from now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I will just end it saying, in my view, don't just help yourself, try to help other people. And I think one of the issues is as you rise, right, you've got to help other people rise as well. So I want to say thank you to this panel. It's a wonderful, I hope all of you feel you learned some things that are right.